Let's take this beautiful 100% cotton and turn it into some gorgeous towels. Let's get started. Hi everyone, it's Steph and welcome to another video. Today we're doing zigzag, and I've done zigzag before on the channel but only as a feature. So this time the zigzag will be all over the towel, and it is a deceptively simple pattern. All it is 3 colours, and each alternating thread is in a different colour, and that's it. So here are some other colour combinations. As you know, I like to give you lots of choices. Here are some monochrome blue, some gorgeous monochrome green, which is really divine. I want to do this one day. And also there's some pink and reds, which I think is quite striking, especially with this design. And lastly, of course, some reds and a very light turquoise. I'll be using 3 colours today. All of them are 8/4 cotton from Maurice Brassard. The first one is ivory. The second one is Sierra, which is a medium brown. And the last one is jeans, a fairly bright blue. So 3 fairly neutral colours, with the blue being a little bit of pop. For equipment, I'll be using my coat rack and clamps as my pegs. And then of course my 60cm rigid Heddle loom, which is about 24 inches. A 10 dent reed, my cardboard tubes slit up the middle, which is what I use to cover the knots, and then my curved end scissors, my retractable measuring tape plus a flexible measuring tape and a clip, my loom clamps, and I'll also be using a pickup stick just to even up the shed at the end of the weaving. And this time I'll need 3 shuttles. And that's it, we are ready to go. The length of the warp is 1.9 meters, which is about 76 inches. And as always, I'll be doing 2 towels of about 80 centimeters each, or 31.5 inches. So I've already got my coat rack, which is what I use as my pegs at the other end of my dining table. And I've just clamped my loom down here. We'll be using a 10 dent reed, and the width in the loom is 55 centimeters, which is around 22 inches. As always, I like to secure my heddle to the apron rod and wind back just a little bit, just to keep everything nice and secure. Here I'm just removing any remaining threads from the previous project, then we can get started. So for warping, I'm just doing alternate colours in each slot. So the first slot I'll be using the ivory, the next slot is the brown, which is Sierra, followed by the blue, which is jeans, and that's pretty much it as far as warping up. So in alternating slots, we've got ivory, Sierra brown, and the jeans blue, continuing across the entire warp. I'm just carrying the colours across without ending them and tying them back on again. The only thing to watch out for here is crossing the threads. The easiest way to ensure that you don't cross the threads, when you're on top, that is when your threads are over the top of the apron bar, keep them to the right whilst you're warping through the slots, and that will keep them out of the way. And then on the opposite, so when the threads are at the bottom of the apron rod, it's the opposite here. So just keep them to the left, and that will keep them out of the way, and that means that you don't have to worry about crossed threads. However, if you do end up with crossed threads, it is not the end of the world. It just means that those last few inches of weaving can be a little trickier with smaller sheds and uneven sheds, but we can use our pickup stick to even up and neaten up those sheds at the end. So it is not the end of the world if you do have crossed threads, so don't beat yourself up if that does happen. So here's what it looks like now. We're looking pretty good, and I'm just making sure I don't have any cross threads here. Everything looks really good, and I can now just go ahead and continue this for the rest of the warp. Now that I'm finished, I'm just tying off those last couple of threads, and then I'm just checking to make sure that I haven't missed any slots or doubled any slots before I go any further. Once I'm happy with that, I can unhook my heddle from the apron rod, unhook my loom from my table, and then wind on just a little bit so I can slot my brown paper, which is what I use for warp separator, into the loom, and then I'll wind on. I'll wind on direct towards the pegs, and when I'm doing this, I'm just pulling back slightly just to even up that tension for when you wind on. Once my loom is on my stand, the fun can now begin. So I'm just securing the warp with some loose overhand knots in small groups, and thanks to a tip, I now pop my heddle into the back position, which means it's less likely to fall off the front. So here I snip the loops off my first group, and then I'm ready to start threading. So here is the threading diagram. It's very simple. It's literally alternating the three colors in slot, hole, slot. So you can see here in the diagram, we can say that the ones are slots and the twos are holes, and we just need to manipulate the threads to equal the diagram. Let me show you what that looks like a little bit closer. So the blue threads are already in the slot, so we're just going to pull out one, and we're going to keep this second thread on top of the heddle. The second one is the brown. We're going to pull both threads out of that slot. We're going to keep one on top of the heddle, and we're going to put the other one through the hole. Next is the ivory. We're going to pull both of those threads out. We're going to put one on top of the heddle, and then we're going to put that one through the slot. And you can see at the top here I've got one blue, one brown, and one ivory, and we can simply put the blue one into the hole, the brown one into the slot, and then the ivory one into the hole, and that is one section done perfectly. So this is what it looks like, which is exactly what we want. As I go, I like to grab groups of 8 threads and then tie a knot down the bottom. I try and get the knots for each group in the same place each time, but sometimes it's not perfect. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter that much. But once I'm done and the last threads are threaded and I've got everything tied up, it's time to lash on. To lash on, I use some scrap yarn that's about 4 to 5 times the width of the loom. I wind half of it up into a yarn butterfly just to make it a little bit easier to work with. I tie one end onto the apron rod, then divide each group of threads in half, drop the yarn through the top and around the bottom of the apron yarn, and then continue that across until all groups are on the thread, the scrap yarn. I like to tighten up a little bit as I go. As you tighten up the threads, they will loosen a little bit as they become tighter around the back beam. So I like to tighten up pretty continuously. Once I feel that I'm happy and the tension is even, I will just make sure by strumming the back of the warp just to see if there's any slack areas that I might want to fix up. Once I'm happy, I will tie the other end of the scrap yarn onto the apron rod, and then I can get to spreading the warp. To spread the warp, I like to throw 3 picks of scrap yarn without beating. Once I've done 3 picks, I will then beat those 3 picks down towards the knots, beating it fairly firmly to get that nice and tight. When it's down the bottom, I like to make sure that I've got a nice straight line because that is the basis of where you're weaving. Once I'm happy there, I will repeat that and do another 3 picks without beating, and then beat those 3 picks down towards the first 3. And that's usually all I need to do to spread my warp. Here I've wound my 3 shuttles in the 3 colours that I'll be using, and now for the best part, weaving. The weft sequence is exactly the same as the warp, so it's just one alternating pick of each colour, and I'll show you what that looks like as well as far as carrying the colours up the selvage. For carrying the 3 colours, normally you would take the working yarn over one of the others and under the other, depending on whether you've ended in a slot or a hole in the warp. In this instance, I have taken the ivory over the blue, under the brown, and then thrown the pick, and that will make a lovely, nice, neat selvage, and I'll show you what that looks like a bit later. Here you can see what that selvage looks like, and you can see little scalloped edges where you've had those 3 yarns going over and under each other. Don't worry about the scalloped edges or it being a little bit bunched up. Once it's wet finished, that will all smooth out to be something that looks really, really pretty on the edges. Here I'm just adding my cardboard tube to cover the knots. You will want to cover your knots to stop them from poking through and distorting your beautiful new weaving. I'll also be adding in my measuring tape and securing it with a quilting clip so that I know where the first towel ends at 80 centimeters or 31.5 inches and where the second towel begins, so I can add some scrap yarn to mark the difference between the two. When I finished the first towel, I was thinking about doing something different for the second. I was thinking about maybe doing some stripes of the 3 colours or something different. I didn't have enough of any one of the colours to do a full towel in one colour. But in the end, I decided not to, and just to continue with this pattern because it is such a beautiful and intricate pattern that just looks stunning just on its own. Once the second towel was done, I just snipped off small groups and tied a knot right up close to where I've put the scrap yarn at the end of the weaving, and then I was able to pull the weaving from the loom. I'm so thrilled with how these turned out. I wet finished these in my washing machine just with a little bit of dish soap to get rid of any machine oils from the manufacture of the yarn, and then I've popped them straight through the dryer so that they're pre-shrunk and ready to sew. After the dryer, I'm giving them a really good iron. As you can see, there's no tracking with these towels, and I really wish I could nail down what causes it, because I would love to be able to call it up on demand. But anyway, as I'm ironing, I'm also snipping off any little tails, and then we are ready to sew. For measurements after wet finishing, the width we started with 55 centimetres and we've ended with 46, which is about 18 inches. For the length we started with 80 centimetres and this time we ended with I think 69 centimetres, which is a little bit over 27 inches. To be able to safely cut these apart, I'm zigzagging up very close to the scrap yarn on the beginning and the end, and also in the middle, either side of the scrap yarn, where I've marked the difference between the first towel and the second towel. Once I've zigzagged, I'll be able to safely cut the towels apart without anything unraveling. I'm using these Handmade with Love fabric strips, and to use them I'm folding them in half and then I'll catch them in the hem, and this means that the towels can be hung up. I find the center by folding in half, mark it with a pin, and then to hem the towels I just fold those zigzagged edges up twice, pin everything in place, and then sew it all down with a straight stitch on my sewing machine. As always, thank you so much for watching, especially if you've made it this far. Thank you for all your kind comments, they really mean a lot to me. If you wish to support me, please click the like button. Super thanks are also available, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. As always, I wish you a wonderful day.